history. We're going to start reviewing our continents and our oceans. I just want the girls to answer.
North America, Africa, Asia, Europe,
You may sit down.
Australia, Antarctica, Europe, North America, South America, Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Southern Ocean.
By the way, what is this one again?
Pacific,
Pacific, not specific. It is Pacific.
Arctic Ocean, Indian Ocean, Asia, Europe, Africa.
All right, girls sit down, boys stand.
Asia, Australia, Antarctica, Africa, South America, North
You
America,
may sit down.
North America, Europe, Africa, Arctic Ocean, Southern Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic
You
Ocean,
may sit down.
Indian Ocean, Asia, Europe, Africa,
Michael may sit down.
South America, North America, Arctic Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Indian Ocean, Southern Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Australia, Antarctica,
Brantley, you may sit down.
Asia, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, Atlantic Ocean, Arctic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Southern Ocean, Indian Ocean.
All right. Think it's a little bit better than yesterday. Let's start on page 50 now. Oh, one more thing I want to do. Let's see if you can tell me the regions without the words. This would be
Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, West.
Said it all. Good job. So, starting on page 50. Have a seat. Squanto begins to teach the pilgrims. Squanto quickly noticed that the pilgrims were very thin, yet they did not eat fish. Why do you not eat fish? He asked. We have no hooks or nets to catch them, they answered. Come with me, Squanto said. I will teach you how to make nets from the tall grass. Excitement began to spread through the colony as the pilgrims saw men catching fish with their grass nets. That night, they sat down with Squanto to a delicious fish dinner. So that's one of the things he taught them, how to make nets out of grass. One day, Squanto and his friends took some pilgrims into the woods. The Native Americans made small cuts in the maple trees, then hung homemade wooden buckets under the holes. To the pilgrims' surprise, sweet, sticky liquid began to drip from the trees into the buckets. When the buckets were full, they showed the pilgrims how to boil the liquid over a fire. Taste, Squanto said. Mmm, said the pilgrims. It almost tastes like the sugar we used to buy in England. And so the pilgrims learned how to make maple syrup and maple sugar. How they had missed the sugar they could buy in England. Now they could use maple sugar to sweeten their food. So another thing you taught them is how to make maple syrup and maple sugar. All right, as big as a mouse's ear. One day in early spring, Squanto announced, look, the oak leaves are as big as a mouse's ear. It is time to plant corn. The pilgrim children standing nearby must have giggled to themselves, a mouse's ear. They watched as Squanto went to the stream with his nets. When Squanto got to the stream, he tossed out his net and pulled it in again, filled with small fish. He did this again and again. The children gave each other a puzzled look. I thought he said it was time to plant corn, said one of the girls. But she watched to see what would happen next. Squanto was always full of surprises. After Squanto finished fishing, he went back to the field and made a small hole in the ground. Plop, plop, Squanto dropped 3 small fish into the hole he had just made. Then he set a kernel of corn and a few bean seeds in the hole. Next, he filled in the hole and made a small mound or hill on top. He made a quick step to the side and made another hole. By now, the children's eyes were wide with wonder. Squanto smiled at the children around him. The fish help the plants to grow strong and healthy, he said. Soon everyone joined in to help. Several children dug small holes with their hands or set the seeds into the holes, while a few brave ones dropped the fish in. Later, Squanto taught the Pilgrim men to plant squash and pumpkin seeds. The Pilgrims traded some of the things they had for the seeds they needed from the Native Americans. All right, so in that section we have several things. First of all, he taught them when to plant the corn. So what did he teach them? When to plant the corn. Then he taught them how to use fish as fertilizer. So he taught them how to use fish as fertilizer. And then he taught them how to plant pumpkins and squash, because that was something they were not familiar with. Turn the page. Still new things to learn. To follow along as I read. As spring changed to summer, there were many things to do and learn. There were plenty of turkeys and deer in the forest for food. When the Pilgrims went into the forest to hunt, they made so much noise the animals ran away. Squanto shook his head. He knew his people did not have these problems. They were taught to move without noise through the forest. The wild animals often did not know the hunters were there until it was too late. The Native American men showed the Pilgrim men how to move quietly through the forest. They told the Pilgrims the deer had a favorite place to drink water. This would be a good place for the Pilgrims to hide to get venison or deer meat for food. All right. Squanto taught the children where to find and pick wild berries to eat. In the fall, he showed them which nuts were good to eat and where to find them. Corn, squash, beans, and pumpkins were also harvested in the fall. Squanto gave a cooking lesson to the Pilgrim women. He taught them how to make succotash by cooking corn and beans together with meat. Squanto also taught the women how to cook the other vegetables. The Pilgrims were not so hungry now, and the children grew stronger. All right, so in that section, he taught the men how to hunt. Okay? Put your hand down. He also taught the children where to find the berries and nuts they could eat. All right? And he taught the women how to cook succotash and how to cook those vegetables that he had taught the men to plant, the pumpkins and the squash. Now remember, they weren't familiar with pumpkins and squash. They wouldn't have known what to do with them. So he taught them how to cook those, as well as how to cook succotash. All right, the Pilgrims give thanks. The Pilgrims had much to thank God for. They decided to have a feast of Thanksgiving. They knew it was only right to invite their faithful friends. Chief Massasoit and 90 of his men came to the Pilgrims' feast, but they did not come empty-handed. They brought 5 deer to share. The first feast of Thanksgiving lasted 3 days. The Pilgrims thanked God for his help and care. God had been good to the Pilgrims. In America, they were free to worship God as they wanted to worship him. Squanto was another special blessing from God. If Squanto had not come to help the Pilgrims, they may not have lived through the second winter. William Bradford, the second governor of Plymouth, wrote about the settlement. He described Squanto as a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. So they called Squanto an instrument of God. When the next winter came, the Pilgrims' supply of food was not as much as they had hoped, but they lived in warm houses and had vegetables to eat. There were times when the Pilgrims were hungry, but there was no starving time. God had led them to a new land of freedom, and God had provided for them through their Native American friends. All right, turn the page. Stop and think. Have you ever had something happen to you which you thought was bad? Perhaps God meant it for good. Captain Hunt kidnapped Squanto. Of course, Captain Hunt was doing something evil, yet we can see the hand of God taking care of not only Squanto, but also the Pilgrims. In the Bible, we read in Genesis the story of Joseph and how his brothers sold him as a slave, yet many years later, Joseph saw God's goodness in something that his brothers had meant for evil. Because remember, if you know that story, if Joseph hadn't been sold as a slave, he wouldn't have been in Egypt, and he wouldn't have been able to tell the Pharaoh what his dream meant, and collected all that food for 7 years of good, so that when the famine came 7 years later, those 7 years of famine, they had lots of extra food that they could use, and they could even sell some. They had so much. So Squanto and Joseph are very, very similar, aren't they? Because Squanto didn't die with his tribe, he was able to help the pilgrims. Yes.
Joseph, King of Dreams, my favorite story in the Bible, actually.
Nice. All right. Comprehension check. What did Squanto learn in England? After he was a slave, and he went to England, when they helped him escape slavery, he went to England and he learned what? English, yes. The English language and how the English lived. So the pilgrims in America, well, it wasn't America yet, but the pilgrims at Plymouth, the Indians would look at them and think they are strange people. But Squanto was already used to the way they did things because he had lived in England and seen how they lived. What agreement did Chief Massasoit and Governor Carver make? What do you call that agreement? It's called a...
Was it like freedom for 50 years or something like that?
It did have, what it was for 50 years. It lasted for 50 years, but what was it called? Yes.
A peace treaty.
A peace treaty. The actual thing they made was called a peace treaty. So that agreement to have peace together, it did last for over 50 years, but it was called a peace treaty. You need to tell me 2 promises of the peace treaty. Yes.
Whenever the Indians and the Pilgrims met, they were unarmed and they couldn't have anything with them.
They could not have any of their weapons when they were together. What else?
They could not kill each other.
Okay, so they wouldn't harm each other, or there was something else too.
They would help them if they were under attack.
Yes, they would help each other. If somebody else attacked them, then the Native Americans said they would help the Pilgrims, or if the Native Americans were under attack, the Pilgrims promised they would help them. So they would help each other if they're under attack. But they also promised, besides not hurting each other, they promised that they wouldn't do something else. They would not...
Battle each other?
That's not hurting each other. That's sort of the same thing.
Fighting each other?
That's still the same thing. You guys keep saying it in different words.
Stealing?
Steal. They would not steal from each other. They promised they would not steal from each other or harm each other. They promised that they would help each other if somebody else attacked them, and they promised that they would not be armed. No guns, no bows and arrows when they came together to visit. All right. The next is, why did Squanto stay with the Pilgrims? Why did he decide to stay with the Pilgrims, Michael?
I forgot. To teach them the Native American ways?
Yes, to teach them some ways that would help them. Remember all the things I just told you that he taught them? He stayed with them to teach them some ways that would help them. All right, now let's talk about some of those ways. What are some of those ways?
How many can you list?
You tell me one.
He helped the men hunt correctly.
He taught the men how to hunt.
He taught them how to use fish for fertilizer.
He taught them to use fish for fertilizer.
He taught them how to make a net.
Yeah, make nets of grass for the fishing. Fishing nets out of grass. Is that yours? All right.
He showed the kids where to find nuts and things.
Nuts and, what was the other thing? Nuts and, somebody help him.
Berry.
Nuts and berries. He showed them where to find nuts and berries to eat. Can you eat all berries? If you see a berry, can you eat it?
No.
Some berries are poisonous.
He teach the women.
Taught.
Taught the women to cook.
Yeah. He taught the women how to cook succotash and some of the vegetables that they weren't familiar with.
He helped them make maple sugar
And syrup. Yeah. Out of the maple sap, he taught them how to make maple sugar and maple syrup.
He also taught them how to plant pumpkins and squash.
Yeah, he taught them how to plant pumpkin squash. That was yours. Do you have another one?
He taught them how to be quiet in the woods.
That's how to hunt. He taught them how to hunt. We already had that one. We're gonna say he taught them how to hunt. Because if you say he taught them how to be quiet in the woods, you need to be able to tell me when they were hunting. Because that was the point of being quiet, when they were hunting. All right, I think we might have gotten them all. I think you guys did a good job on that. All right, one more. The Pilgrims, and everybody should know this one, held a feast of what? To celebrate our faith?
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. All right, quickly review with you for the test. You may shut your books, but don't put them away. A group of Englishmen that traveled to America for adventure were the
Strangers.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just blur the strangers. The Pilgrims had a feast of what? Thank God for
Thanksgiving.
Don't do that. You're holding it out and you're yelling. We don't do that. I don't want to have to keep telling you guys that. Just say the word and don't yell it. The first form of self-government in the New World was the
Mayflower
Mayflower Compact. Good job. The Native American who stayed with the Pilgrims and helped them. The military leader of the Pilgrims.
Miles
And who left Holland because their children were forgetting the English ways?
Separatists.
Very good. The ship that brought the Pilgrims to the New World.
Mayflower.
The Pilgrims landed in the New World when?
1620.
And the Pilgrims named their settlement Plymouth. And Governor Carver agreed to a peace agreement with Chief Massasoit. All right, very good. All right, so tomorrow we'll review for the quiz again, and we will review for the test.